Hey everybody, this is Mr. Enright. We're gonna start to talk about the Great Depression. Listen, just because you're not in school doesn't mean we're not going to learn. I'm gonna try and, you've got the reading assignments that I've given you. You've all been on the Google Classroom. You know what you have to do. I'm gonna try and supplement that a little bit by having these little talks. I don't know how well this is gonna work. We'll see, but we'll give it a shot. Um, You you know how the Great Depression started. You've done the reading. But let's talk about the four biggest factors and just make sure you're clear on them. And I need wait, some of you don't have a notebook in front of you. Get a notebook. Not pencil. Not pencil. You know better. I'll break the pencil. You're chewing gum. I can see it through the computer. Go spit the gum out. This is school. Okay. Now, um, I want you to write down the four most important factors in the crash that led to the Great Depression. There are lots of factors. This is not something that historians or economists agree on, what caused the Great Depression, but there are a bunch of things that worked together, contributed to it, and some of them uh, seem to have more importance than others. So let's look at them. We'll write them down and then we'll talk about each one. There is overproduction. There is margin buying on the stock market. So the inflation of the stock market through margin buying. There's the farm crisis. And there's consumer debt. Those four things, along with a whole bunch of other factors, contributed to this crash. All right. So we'll talk about them one at a time. You're going to take a few notes on this. And hopefully it'll get us to understand. You do the reading as well. Make sure you've done that reading in the homework assignments, but jot some notes down as we go. Okay. Overproduction. We've been talking through the 1920s about how the factories are churning out all of these new products. We got radios and refrigerators and automobiles and electric irons and you name it, vacuum cleaners. And those factories started producing those products with an open market. Nobody had a refrigerator. Nobody had ever needed one before. So there are millions of Americans without a refrigerator. And so for years, they're making refrigerators, selling it to a market of people who didn't have one. But as the years went on, everybody who could afford a refrigerator already had one. The factories are still churning them out. And even though we have dozens and dozens of new products on the markets, eventually the market is saturated with those new products. There aren't a lot of people still buying refrigerators. There aren't a lot of people still needing a radio. They might want a new one. They might want a better one, especially with the cars. But for the most part, sales are going to go down, and the need to produce those products goes down. As the 20s comes to an end, that saturation point, the point where you don't need any more, or you don't nearly need as many as you used to, is reached in a lot of different industries, including the auto industry and the refrigerators and radios and all those things we've just been talking about. So the warehouses are filling up with extra refrigerators, and there aren't as many people to buy them. So the factories, the manufacturers, are having to think about and begin to lay people off and reduce production. There's that moment where the sales are less than the production, and the businesses are overproducing. Some economists would say America is under-consuming because they are not buying as much as they used to. So we reached that point in several industries right at the end of the 1920s. Margin buying we talked about when we were looking at the 1920s was one of the reasons why the boom happened, because the stock market in particular, lots and lots of people are buying stocks, and the prices keep going up. What's that called? You remember, don't you? What kind of market? When the prices of stocks keep going up. Right. Right. It's a bull market because it's charging forward. Well, when there's a bull market, margin buying works great because you can borrow enough money to buy 10 times as many shares and you get the profit on 10 times as many shares. You just, when you sell it, you pay the loan back. And you all saw the problem with that. What happens when the price goes down? Eventually it does. This is capitalism. And we have a business cycle. It goes up and down, right? Eventually the stock market is going to go into, what's the opposite of a bull market? Right, a bear market. Good. They actually have that bull because bulls charge forward and bears because bears hibernate, and they think that a bear market is a sleepy market. That's why it's called a bear market. Anyway, um, when it's a bull market, that margin buying makes all kinds of sense. But even then, it can be disastrously bad. Even when the market is bull, when there's lots of people buying stocks, some people are selling. Some stocks are going down in price. Just the one you bought might not be a good one, or it might not be going up right now, and you borrow money to buy it. You remember that's how you make money on stocks, right? You sell them for more than you buy them for. So if I buy 100 shares at $10 a share, it costs me $1,000. If a month later I can sell it for $11 a share, I made $100. I bought 100 shares at $10 a share, and they went up $1 per share. But if they go down $1 per share or $2, and I borrowed money to buy that, I still have to pay it back. I can sell off my shares, but I don't have enough to pay back the loan. And that's what buying on margin is. It's borrowing money to buy the stocks. And it was one of the reasons why the stock market was exploding in prices. It just, prices kept going up and up and up and up. It's going to come to an end eventually. And when it did come to an end, the stock market came crashing down because so many people had borrowed money. So now, when I sell my shares, let's say I bought that $1,000 worth of AT&T at $10 a share, but the price didn't go up. It went down to $9 a share, to $8 a share. Now when I sell it, I bought 90% of it on credit. I still owe the bank, and I don't have enough. So I have to sell something else too in order to pay the debt. Now the problem is when I start selling other things, and I'm not the only one doing this, the price begins to go down for those other shares, leading people who had purchased those shares to think about selling theirs at a loss and having to pay off the bank. So it's a downward spiral as more and more people sell, and that's one of the things that happened. So one of the factors that led to the crash was the amount of debt in the stock market itself. So we've got industry slowing down because of market saturation. So we've got that overproduction. We have stock prices being way too high because people are buying them on credit, and that credit being a threat under the market all the time. The fourth thing that led to this crash is the farm crisis. Now you got to remember back to World War I, when Hoover convinced a lot of people. Remember, he was the head of the Food Administration. He convinced a lot of people to borrow money to improve production on their farms. We needed the farm production to help our allies, to help our troops fighting in France. And so the Food Administration convinced farmers to plant more. And they did plant more. And they did. They practically, and many would say, won the war because they provided food not just for us, but for our allies. And they made a lot of money on it. They did. They borrowed money, but because the prices kept going up, demand was high despite the supply being so high, they were able to make a lot of money. But the war ends and the debts don't. Prices of the grain and the corn and wheat come down, and the farmers are having to pay back those big debts with less and less money. And the only thing they can do is plant more, but the more they plant, the lower the prices go. That's supply and demand. They're increasing supply. And demand is now lower and lower and lower, because the Europeans are now producing their own grain. And so a lot of farmers begin to go bankrupt. banks are closing in on their loans. And this happens years before the Depression. The first sector of the economy to feel the pinch of the Great Depression is the farm sector. There's a crisis there years before the stock market crashes. The last thing we have is consumer debt. We talked about this before as well, because this is one of the things from the 1920s. One of the reasons for the boom is that people are using borrowed money to buy products. They can buy a refrigerator, as you know, because you did your radio ads. They can buy a refrigerator with an installment plan. There's nothing wrong with this, as long as you have a job. And you've got that weekly paycheck, so you can always pay your bills. But as the economy slows down and more factories are laying off workers, more and more workers can't pay back their installment loans. And that leads to an unstable situation. Now you got all four of these together and other factors as well. These are just the four biggest. The four of these together lead to a situation that when the crash comes, it's far worse than anybody expected. It starts with the stock market crashing on October 29th, 1929. This is one of the few time periods in American history where we have a starting date. October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashes, a lot of businesses close, and it begins the decline. And that decline goes on for 4 years. From 1929 to 1933. The economy just spirals downward. More and more companies lay off workers. The fewer workers who are working, the more they default on their installment plans. The more they default on their installment plans, the more other companies close. The more those companies close and lay off workers, the more workers can't pay their loans, etc., etc. A downward spiral. All right, and those are the four big underlying causes of the Great Depression. I hope this has been helpful. We'll talk soon.